Hey, how are you? This week we're going to discuss Gladiator Quest for the Rudis, a two-player combat strategy game. Stick around.
So hello, I'm Patrick Stevens, and this is the new show, the new video show. Welcome. I'd like to just welcome our guest today, Jim Trunzo, who is the designer of Gladiator Quest for the Rudis, which is up on Kickstarter right now. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you very much for having us.
Great. So the point of the show, what we really want to do is just dive right in. But I guess before we start talking about mechanics and gameplay, this particular game, how did you come up with the design? What got you started on the process of the design on this?
Well, Spartacus, Blood and Sand. I'm a bit of a Gladiator fanatic. I don't know where the gestation of the love of the arena that started. I guess the old Roman movies. I go back forever. I'm an old guy, and the actual idea of how we make it. There have been some other games out there, some Gladiator games, and I get everything I can. I've never been really. They're good games, so I don't want to reflect badly on any of the products that are out there, but they didn't suit my needs. That they could be played solo or quickly, and most of them, to be honest, other than Avalon Hill's Gladiator, were role-playing games. You're always going to, with a game like this, run into that conflict of the historical versus the cinematic. And there's a huge gap between a real Gladiator contest, which was bloody enough, and then what you saw on Gladiator with Russell Crowe, or the really well done but very bloody Stars Spartacus series.
So behind you there, you've set up quite the arena.
In the actual game, you're going to get the sand floor of an arena with the parameters on a flat playing board, a typical game surface. Of the stands of, say, the Colosseum in Rome. This is a little more elaborate because that's just how I do things when I set up the play test. I like to make it as realistic as possible. The game uses very nicely illustrated, very thick and easy to move counters at this point. If we get funded and we hit a stretch goal, we're going to move it up to one of the goals. Stretch goals is to put in the standees. I just happen to be into painting miniatures, and so I use miniatures, but it functions the same way whether you're using miniatures or standees or the counters that will come with the game.
All right, so that's actually interesting because the game comes with the game board and counters, but if somebody wants to go out there and get a hex grid and some terrain and some minis, the game will function without problem in that setting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We tried to make it. We wanted to keep the game price reasonable by today's standards, and that's stretching it. We know games are not cheap. We wanted to give them the top-notch components, and we looked into some things like including plastic miniatures and getting a bit more elaborate in some other areas. And truthfully, it just shot the price up so high that it just didn't make sense. It was easier and more logical to allow people to purchase the game, a completely functional game with perfectly functional components, and then if they wanted to go in, if 2 out of 10 decided, hey, I want to make this a little more elaborate, and wanted to go out and buy their own Gladiator miniatures, paint them, name them after themselves, hey, go for it. What we didn't want this to devolve into was a you hit me, and I'll try to defend. Now I'll hit you, and you try to defend. Now you hit me,
right.
And that kind of back and forth. Now that works in some games. Again, I'm not being critical, but the control factor allows us to certainly create a wide range of different ratings for the characters. If you fall within their control, when it comes time to check control again, they have the option to see if they retain control. So one gladiator might be able to make 2 or 3 moves in a row if he's fortunate.
So how does the control factor actually work in game?
They have attribute ratings: control factor, the number of hexes that they can move, their strength, their agility, etc. The control factor sets the boundary. A light gladiator like the Rediarius, who was the popular net and trident guy, wears virtually no armor. And he's extremely lithe, and he's designed for movement. His whole concept to survive is, I need to stay in control, I need to keep at a distance. He has a ranged weapon, the trident, that allowed him to keep 6 to 10 feet away and still strike. He used his net that he could throw 10 or 15 feet to engulf his foe. Where somebody like his standard opponent, a Secutor, was a very heavily armed gladiator, and he carried the scutum, the shield that modeled after the Roman soldier. That shield by itself was 22 pounds. In all, his armor probably weighed somewhere in the neighborhood of 38 pounds. In the heat and sand, the Rediarius probably had 6 pounds of equipment on. So his goal was to tire this guy out, because he couldn't take him on face to face. He'll get cut out. He has no armor, and he's going to get sliced to pieces, while this guy hides behind this massive shield. His movement, for example, is 2 to his 4. His control factor is only a 7 to his 9. So basically, then, the control factor is part of what will determine the style of the gladiator you're trying to portray. The Rediarius should be able to retain control more frequently. He should be able to move and get onto a flank easier. So that's all part of what went into the design. But the control factor really comes down to this. If you're not in control, you can't do much. You've got to be in control to really effectively attack or move or whatever you want to do. It was constantly feints, movement, strike, block, regroup, move a little more, feint again. And that was a big part of the design element, but also a big part of the problem. Everything worked well when I was using a light gladiator versus a heavy gladiator. The minute I put a heavy in against another heavy, or a medium against a heavy, 2 guys who couldn't move well, everything had to be readjusted, because that basically got down to, I'll pound on you, you pound on me, because neither of us can really move, and once we're engaged, we're just going to sit there and smack each other, which is exactly what I didn't want. So it took a little redesign.
So you're saying that, one control factor is 7, where the other one is 9. So how would the one gladiator over the other gain control in the fight, I guess?
We shoot dice, even though we know that dice are the holy grail of most gamers. They love their dice, boy. They love them. They need 50 dice, and they want to roll them all. The problem with that is that they scatter. You've got to pick them up. They fall on the floor. You have to add them. You've got to read them. You've got to gather them up and throw again. I was looking for something that allowed a better flow to capture the feel of the speed of the fight and the movement. Yeah, you'll play through it slowly while you learn it, but eventually it's very fluid. So we went to something we had used again with Tabletop called the Fast Action Deck. We're calling this the Arena Action Deck. It's got a group of numbers on it, and one of the first one up at top is control factor. So you flip the card. You only take 1 reading from each card. There are 100 cards in the deck, and a complete randomized system worked out on a spreadsheet to assure that we would get the kind of random accuracy we would want in a deck of this type. And you flip the card, take the reading to determine if the gladiator's in control. For example, the number here is 5. If we were checking the control factor on our Rediarius, the net and trident guy, his control factor being a 9, it falls within his range, he is in control. Had I flipped this card, the control factor was a 15. He would not be in control. It would transfer to his opponent. This determines everything. And the nice thing between this and the other cards is that you don't need a bunch of tables. You're not constantly going back to the rules. Everything's right on the card. You've got the control. You have random numbers to determine the hits. You have a area of 1d4 through 1d20, so that if it's a damage 1d6, you can immediately get the number just by flipping a card, not rolling a dice, waiting for it to stop, make the rule, read, pick it up again, and do it. We also have down the left-hand column the location of where the hit would be. The two things you do when you're attacking is determine your attack and tell where you want it, where you're aiming it for. The general location, high, medium, low. The reason for that is you'd think, wow, if it hits, it hits. But all of these gladiators have around their, this is a very amateuristic picture that I stole off the internet for my place. I'll show you real cards later. But each one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 18 different body areas indicated. And each body area indicates how much armored protection they have on it. So, for example, this particular veteran secutor has a helmet on with a 4 by it. That helmet, if you would hit him in the head, would absorb 4 damage. So it's important that we be able to know where the location is. So if you call, you're going to thrust your trident at me high, and I flip up a card and the location says head, then I check head, and I see, I did 3 damage, but his helmet absorbs that much. I didn't hurt him at all. Our attack and defend cards that make up your deck. Each gladiator has his own unique deck made up based on his type. Each deck has specific attacks and defenses, and some of those attacks, defenses can be used against a certain attack, other ones can't. And admittedly, the attack and defend decks are a little text heavy, but that was to avoid having a rule booklet 50 pages thick that you were flipping through constantly to determine. When you pick an attack and a defense, once you go to resolve it on one of the 2 cards, everything is there, what you need. How much damage, whether or not you've scored a critical hit that could end the fight right there, end the match there. If you fumbled, you go to make, you attempt to toss your net. If you're a Rudis and you fumble, you may well have just gotten your net caught in your own trident. Now you're in a mess. And it's all there on the card. And all it takes to determine is another card flip.
How does movement play into all of this? How does movement work?
Next to getting the damage and that balance correctly, I've never had as much trouble with trying to work with a product with movement than I have with this. Primarily, again, because once the 2 gladiators engaged, there was a limitation to the movement, and disengaging had to come with a cost. Each gladiator has a movement factor that's listed on his card. As I said, the Rudis can move 4 hexes. So if we started the match and we move the little referee out of the way there, let's assume that the Rudis is in control for the sake of the demo. He would get his first move, and he can move 4 hexes. His goal is try to get around that huge shield and attack the flank if he possibly can. So I would move him 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes. He could make a facing change. And then if I were within distance, he could make an attack. Typically, most of these guys have to be adjacent to attack. Most of their attacks with their swords and so forth are 1 hex, from 1 hex away, adjacent. The benefit of this guy he's saying, hey, I'm practically naked. You got to give me some kind of break here. And his break was that he did have the long trident, and he could throw the net. So at 1, 2, 3 hexes away, he would be able to, if he wanted to, use his net in one of 4 different fashions. He could whip it at his feet and attempt to trip him. He could throw it and try to engulf him with the net. He could swing it at his eyes to try to distract him, to gain, and so forth. He, of course, would defend against that action. If he does nothing, he may counter move, and in his case, his best move would be to immediately, he has 2 movement, and which means he could literally close on the ready Arius and be right there in his face, right where he wants to be. Which now presents a problem for the ready Arius, especially if he's not in control. If the ready Arius stays in control, he can disengage and try to create distance with his superior movement. He can even, play a special card called disengage or breakaway and turn his back. He was the only gladiator that the Romans would not have literally executed on the spot for running. That was, you just could not run in the arena without being executed. I mean, that wasn't what they came to see. You were there to fight. That was your training. Except for the ready Arius. He was permitted to run. So we've worked that into the game. However, if he turns his back to bolt, there's an attack of opportunity presented. And he's going to there's going to be a chance he's going to get hit for even if he backs straight up and turns to run, the attack of opportunity is there, and he could take a blow. So movement works that way. The other thing that we found when we brought in, say, 2 heavy gladiators, was that because their movement was similar, it was almost impossible with change of facing to gain a flank. So we put in a rule, or I put in a rule, that basically allows you to attempt to gain that flank. And you play the card, gain a flank. If you gain the flank, great. Now you've got an advantage because you're attacking a non-frontal position where he's not blocking you big time with his shield. But if you don't gain the flank, then the penalty is that you lose your control. One of the things that defeated the heavy gladiator was a complete loss of stamina. And every attack, every defense on the card has a stamina penalty. It can be anywhere from -1 to a -3. When your stamina hits 0, all of your major attributes is reduced by 1. When you lose 4 more stamina past that, it's reduced the second time. And movement goes down to a virtual standstill. If you want to take advantage of movement, like your normal movement might be 2. You want to exert yourself and run to make up, and so, this guy, I got him pinned. If I could just get 1 more move, I can only move 2, but I want to pin him against this wall. I'll run at him. Well, that's fine. You can, but it's going to cost you 3 stamina to run. To gain that 1 extra hex, you're going to pay a price. It becomes a tactical decision as how much movement do I want? Is it important enough for me to pin him against somewhere to limit his movement and exhaust myself in the process? So the whole thing comes down to constantly being aware, okay, how much stamina do I have left? How many wounds have I taken? How bad, what kind of shape is he in?
How long have you played this for?
About 6 months of hard play testing, probably 6 months prior to that, the design, and then the constant evolution through the play testing because, well, just that the gaining a flank thing, which just put in last week, for example. Really? So each time we play, something new comes up, and every time we introduce a new gladiator deck, with new attack cards and new defense cards, we've got to see how each of those work. Does the card make sense? Is it redundant? Is it too powerful? Is it too easy to defend against? So it's an evolution for sure.
Okay, and then I have another question too, because there is it does seem like there's a bit of scorekeeping with this. So how does the game take care of that?
Don't laugh because it's really ugly. But
I won't laugh.
The real one's going to look a heck of a lot better. There's going to be a score pad included with 100 matches.
Perfect.
And basically, and it will be a fold-out so that if you want to fight 2-on-2 matches, or perhaps 2 beginning fighters against the champion, Primus. He was the #1 fighter in the Gladiator schools, for example. You could do a 2-on-1 easy enough, or a 2-on-2, or simply a 1-on-1. And all you have to do is taking the numbers from the card, transferring them to the column, and what we have is every column that could potentially change during the match. If I cut your hamstring, if I got behind you, sliced your hamstring, you're probably going to lose, you're going to lose movement. So to make sure that you know, we have movement here. So if you start out with a movement of 3 and you lose 1, you mark it down to 2. And then the 2 things that we've talked about already, Patrick, the hit points and the stamina are charted too. As you do the wounds.
Yeah, so let's hear about the life and death system. I'm ready to go with that.
So the editor would listen to the crowd and try to gauge the tenor of the crowd. Did they want him dead? Did they want to let him live? Did he fight well enough that the crowd said, hey, let him go? There's a small chart that says how many cards you take off the top of the deck. 3 to represent the audience, 1 per class. If he's a veteran, 1 card for the veteran status. If he's a Primus, 3 cards. The deck is biased towards letting him live. So the more cards that you draw, the better chance that a thumbs up is going to come, and he's going to be allowed to be left to fight another day.
I see.
And then the last card you take, you set aside. That's the editor's card. Because the bottom line is, this guy paid for it, and his decision is going to count double. So then it starts, and the crowd begins to scream, and you flip the card up, and there will be a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and then the Latin word mitte, for, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, for mercy, or let him go, or dismiss him, allow him to leave the sand. Or, and I'm sure I'll mispronounce this one, ugla, which was kill him.
Okay.
It's I-U, never mind. Anyhow, we'll just go with kill him and let him live. So the crowd would look, and the first one would be let him live. The second, let him live. Looking good for him. The third, no. Take him down, kill him. So it's the fourth, kill him. Now it's 2-2. So the crowd split. Some want him to show mercy to him. Others, they're looking for the blood. The editor makes the decision. His card counts double. He has it. Thumbs up, let him live. And so he would be allowed to leave the field of battle and fight another day. The victor would then roll on our reward chart if you want. You don't have to. There are a lot of little things in the game if you want to conduct a mini campaign or track some things. But depending on your victory and over the quality of your opponent, you might be granted something like a laurel leaf or the laurel wreath crown. You might be given gold or silver that is actually yours to keep. So, we try to keep the suspense up at the end, too. Unless it's an out-and-out kill, we want to get that crowd involved, and we want to put a little suspense into it.
with the suspense of flipping the cards, was that a kind of a back and forth between you guys, or did you have that right in there from the beginning?
No, actually, that was mine from the beginning, and he loved the idea. Where we did go back and forth was whether or not to use the thumbs up, thumbs down, which most people recognize.
I see.
I wanted to go the historic route, and it was actually thumb sideways and thumb tucked. If the thumb was held sideways, he waited. If he started motioning down, and that's where they think the thumbs down came from, what he was really doing was saying, stab him, slice him. And the thumbs, and sometimes he'd take this thumb and move it back, shove it into his, stab him in the throat.
Right.
Thumb tucked, either underneath or inside a solid fist, meant he lives. Even a small arena was huge. You know, I mean, the Colosseum in Rome dwarfs any football stadium we have nowadays.
Right.
Now you can imagine trying to see a little thumb sticking up. It was virtually impossible. Many of the people in the crowd would wave a white handkerchief or white rags to indicate mercy. And the shouts of the Latin words were as effective because you just couldn't see it. So the thumb up, thumb down just wasn't enough for the crowd to see. So they needed to make a much more emphatic gesture. So I wanted to go with the closed fist and the tucked fist. And Stewart said, you know, I think it's just going to be, even if that it's a little bit of a stretch historically, let's go with the familiar thumbs up, thumbs down, because they're not sitting 100 feet away. They're looking at the card. They'll know. So we went with that.
So the two decks here, we have the Fate deck and what is it, the Summa Rudis deck? Is that how you pronounce it, the Summa Rudis deck?
Yes. Summa Rudis being the chief referee. Now, they're not huge decks. They're there were only so many things that the ref could do, and these are certainly not representative of what, again, I'll show you the real artwork later. But there's a 30-card Fate deck, and before the game start or the match starts, you shuffle the deck and you assign a card to each gladiator. These are pivotal cards in a lot of cases, so they're limited. If you're a beginner, you don't even get one. Okay. Once you're a veteran, you are given one Fate card. If you are a second sword, or they called it the Secundus Palus, the number 2 man, you get 2 cards, and if you are the champion, you get 3 cards. So we would deal each one out, and you would look at it before the game started, or before the match started, because it might be usable right away. And as quickly as death comes, the worst thing you can do is hold it too long. This one, for example, says if you commit a fumble, you can play this card instead and prevent the fumble. So you don't drop your weapon, or you don't trip and fall in the sand and put yourself on your back in a vulnerable position. So you can save this until the time comes, and then just when he thinks he's okay, Fate steps in appropriately and says, no, you didn't fall. You caught your balance. You're okay, buddy. And you get to stand. This one says, play this in place of any other action. You regain your second wind. Do a 1d4 check and regain that much stamina. So come the end of a match and you're sucking air and you decide now's the time. You do that, flip up one of the arena action cards, check the 1d4, and it will give you a 1, 2, 3, or 4, and you add that to your stamina, representing your second wind, and you can fight a while longer at peak efficiency.
I see.
So the Fate deck has it's 30 cards, and it's 22 unique different things that can happen. Everything from automatically tripping your opponent to the gods smiling on you because they're happy that you have sacrificed toward them. So for this match only, you get to increase your control factor by 1. Or it might say they're not happy with you. You haven't paid enough attention. You haven't venerated the gods. Guess what? You're not feeling too well. Lower your control factor by 1. So the fates can step in. The For The Rudis cards are basically function in kind of the same way. They can give a gladiator a huge break if it comes up. Each gladiator only gets 1. And basically, it could be something as seemingly innocuous as a piece of equipment breaks and the referee stops whatever's happening, adjusts your equipment, tells you to go to your starting points and draw a new control factor. Well, that may not seem too drastic, but if you're lying on your back in the sand and your enemy's got a 3-pronged trident ready to shove into you, and you decide might be a good time for the referee to say, wait a minute, I'm halting this thing. We're going to take a little breather here, and suddenly that what appeared to be a very bad situation turns into something else. On the flip side, though, you might get this card that states, immediately after your opponent has asked for mercy, you can make 1 undefended attack. Check for the damage. If a kill doesn't result, continue to the decision of the crowd and the editor. If it does, congratulations.
Wow.
But basically, we're saying by the time the referee steps in, you may have already started your attack and can't halt it.
Right.
This gives you the chance that, like, hey, I'm not leaving. He's only got 3 points left, and I didn't see the ref waving me off, man. I'm going. And you get the strike, and it may be a clean win there for you, and a kill, which is, of course, more satisfactory to the audience. But so we tried to work all these little details in.
Is there anything else that you wanted to go over, Jim? Anything else that you wanted to talk about?
I just wanted to mention that with the original game will come with 4 different styles of gladiators, and each gladiator will have 4 individual cards at 4 different career stages. So, and there'll be a system, so you can start out playing the best against the best against the worst. You can follow the track on, okay, if you get so many wins, get rid of that beginner card, use the veteran card, and try to work your way up into the championship. But the thing I really wanted to say was the reason that it's called Quest for the Rudis, the Rudis was actually a small wooden sword that eventually would be carved with the names and the victories, the number of victories of the gladiator to whom it was presented. But the Quest for the Rudis comes down to that. When you were given that wooden sword, you were given your freedom. You were no longer a slave. And people forget that. The majority of these gladiators were slaves. They had worked, they were slaves from the mines, or they were brought in because they looked like they were good physical specimens. They were prisoners of war. They were bought as slaves, and they were property. Now, there were free men, free Roman citizens, who got into so much debt that they thought, hey, the only way I'm going to pay my debt off is to take my chances in the arena. But the majority being slaves, if you were awarded the Rudis, you were given your freedom. And from the moment you had that sword, you had to carry it with you to show you were a free man, but you never had to fight again in the arena. One of the famous gladiators that's in the stretch goal was a gladiator named Flama. And he was famous because he didn't win the Rudis once, which is a tremendous feat, because that means you've won a lot of fights. He was given it 4 times.
Wow.
He won his freedom 4 times, and he turned it down each time because he just loved the adulation and fighting in the arena, and eventually died at the ripe old age of 38, I think. So.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, that's awesome, Jim. So thank you so much for being on the show this week. I really, really appreciate it.
Listen, thank you for the opportunity. Let's hope the game gets funded, and we'll send you a copy.
No, I appreciate that.
I just wanted to say thanks again to Jim for being on the show and explaining the great mechanics of that game. Please visit our website at www.tabletoptorch.com. Sign up for our newsletter. It's a weekly newsletter released on Fridays, and it has great information for the tabletop game designer. While you're there, check out the 2015 Tabletop Design and Marketing Rulebook. It's free on the website right now, so go over there and give it a download.